Thursday, November 26, 2020, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So can Britain go bankrupt? What would happen if Britain went bankrupt? Can we really go bankrupt as a country? Well, that's what I'm going to look at today. And it's not clickbait. I'm not trying to be gloom and doom. It's the reality. Even the mainstream media is talking about that. Before I start, though, today, of course, I'd like to wish a happy Thanksgiving Day to my American viewers, U.S. viewers. Thanksgiving, of course, happened a year after the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth, New Plymouth, Plymouth Rock. And I've been doing a little bit of research about the Pilgrims, even though I had learned in history about them, but I looked a little deeper into it. And most of them originally came from a small village in Nottinghamshire in England called Scrooby, Scrooby. And the main reason they had to leave Scrooby is because they wanted to practice their religion in private. And at the time, the church and the state were very much linked or melded together. You had to go to church, to the local approved church every Sunday. And if you didn't, you could be in big trouble. So they had to leave to Holland because Holland was more tolerant. But they stayed there a few years, and then they were able to get a way out and create like a company called the New Plymouth Company and go to the New World. And that's how it started. So it must have been very lonely for these people because they very few people were brave enough to try first of all to challenge the government and try to not follow their rules, and then to go to a place no one had been, like thousands of miles across the ocean back in 1620, really. So it's about 400 years ago that they landed there. When you think about why they left England, went to Holland, and then took the big chance, the big risk of going across the ocean, and a lot of people died crossing, it makes you wonder about today, what's happening, how the government is forcing us to do things. And most of us, of course, are consenting. The Pilgrims didn't consent. So that's my message for the day. It's not just about Thanksgiving, but it's also why they were there, I would say. So, yes, can Britain or the UK go bankrupt? Well, Alan Greenspan said once that the US can't go bankrupt because they can just print the money. I guess the UK would be the same thing, and we're doing that. We're printing the money, the government and the Bank of England. And by now, we should forget the premise that the Bank of England is independent, because it's not. It's working right along with the government. And even if it was a Labour government, they'd be working right along with that government. They are, for all intents and purposes, monetizing the debt. Why do I say for all intents and purposes? Because they can't really legally, and it wouldn't look good either, just buy it straight off the government. So the government has to issue it into the market, the financial markets, new debt. And then the next day or two, the Bank of England will come and buy that secondary market debt, because it becomes a secondary market debt. They can do that. And that's what they do. And apart from that, though, they have reenacted or reactivated this Ways and Means account the Bank of England has for the UK Treasury. The Ways and Means account is just a way of monetizing debt, really. And it's debt that is not in the books, I would say, of the government. So we don't even know how much funny money the Bank of England has provided to to the government. It could be hundreds of billions, we don't know. So that Ways and Means account was reactivated this year. So there's that as well. So of course, if it were you or me and we were up to here in debt, if we lost our jobs, didn't have any savings, we'd have to declare bankruptcy. Our creditors would lose out. We could do that as well as a country, but it's more complicated. And it was done actually by the UK back in 1976. 1976 IMF crisis, of course. The IMF had to provide a bailout for the UK. Back then it was very different because there were capital controls. Now there's no capital controls, and the central banks basically have a lot of credibility still. People accept their paper. So the market right now, the financial markets, borrowers still give the UK government, the Bank of England, credibility, and they still accept their paper. So how are we going to get out of this debt trouble? Well, I think what they're going to try to do, of course, is to write off the debt via the debasement of the currency, the British pound. And why is that? Well, because the debt owed by the government is in British pounds. So if you make that debt become worth less versus everything, like real things, like people's efforts as well, labor, people's production, it will be easier to pay that debt off, because the pound that it's owed in is going to become worth less and less. And that's called inflation. Also financial repression, trying to keep interest rates below the rate of inflation. And inflation, I mean the inflation of the credit and currency, of the new money that they're creating. And who does that punish? Well, it punishes the creditors. And who are the creditors? Well, financial institutions, the Bank of England itself, of course, because they're buying a lot of this. You or whoever is holding big balances of currency, be it at home, cash, physical cash, or in the bank, that cash, that currency is going to become worth less and less. It's going to buy less and less in the future. That's how governments do it, short of basically writing off the debts, which was something that Iceland did. Greece almost did, but they didn't allow Greece to do it. And either way, writing off the debt, restructuring, or going bankrupt, declaring bankruptcy, or going through the debasement route of inflation, either one is really not a good prospect for the economy, for people living in that economy, for us, of course. And as I said many times, you need to be aware of this so that you can try to protect yourself financially. Of course, you have to make sure you stay productive in this economy, because Rishi Sunak, he came out with his spending program yesterday, or his budget. And right now, he is talking about taxing, having to increase taxes, but he hasn't done it yet. He's left it. He's kicked the can down the road, so he's still spending a lot. That's the main message we get here from this budget, or this statement. Still spending a lot. The other thing I would say for people, you might be starting out, might be young, or you've worked all your life already, you've retired, or you're thinking of retiring. If you do have savings, I think those savings are going to be confiscated. And I don't mean physically. They're going to be confiscated. Their purchasing power is going to be confiscated. And one way to protect yourself, of course, from that is getting a currency that is stronger than the pound. And I don't think any other fiat currency is going to do that well, even though some will probably do a little better, like the Swiss franc maybe. maybe the dollar, but the dollar is also in bad shape. But there is one thing that will protect you, in my opinion. And you might think, wow, well, gold and silver have gone down so much in the last few days. I don't want to buy gold and silver. Is it a coincidence that we've seen this big drop in gold and silver prices while we're hearing about all this really debt tsunami that they're announcing, deficit spending that they're announcing? No, it's no coincidence, because they want to discourage you from protecting yourself, because they want to keep this game going. So I would say it's more important than ever, if you have already physical gold and silver, to keep a hold of it. And if you don't, or even if you already do, try to accumulate more. Yes, do have some cash. Some people have said that having some cash is a little bit of a psychological boost when you see the volatile price moves. So there you go. So let's quickly look at some stories that I read through yesterday. The first one is from the FT. It says Sunak warns of economic emergency as borrowing hits record £394 billion. So that's for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. That's from April to April. So not a good headline from the FT. And then you've got the Telegraph. Alistair Heath from the Telegraph says, and this is not me, this is him, Britain is facing ruin, but the Labour Tories are still refusing to accept it. Rishi Sunak knows the dangers, but his party has embraced a destructive economic illiteracy. So what does he mean here? Well, he's basically saying that they're going to keep spending. They have made some cuts. They cut the foreign aid budget from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%. And a lot of people are unhappy about that. And you'd think, why would a country that owes so much, that is in so much trouble domestically, want to still give almost 1% of its GDP to other countries? Well, we're told that it's the right thing to do to help poorer countries, even though we're getting poor as well here. I would say the other thing that they don't talk about is, if you think about where that money goes to other countries, right, to poorer countries, I assume it goes there in pounds or maybe in dollars. And what did these poor countries do with that money? Well, that money, I assume, goes to governments in those countries. And I would say those governments are usually corrupt. So what will these foreign governments that get our foreign aid do? I would assume that they spend a lot of it through probably multinational corporations that are based here in the UK, or it could be even from other countries, but that have a close relationship with our politicians. So there's that as well. When you think about foreign aid, it's a little bit of a gravy train, I would say. I haven't really looked into it that deeply, but just think about it. That money just doesn't go to, let's say, Angola or Ethiopia and sit there in their banks. They're going to use it for projects or for other things. And they're going to spend it in the UK or elsewhere, right? So, Telegraph, yeah, they're saying we're going down the road of socialist Europe, right? We're not cutting the size of government. We're continuing to spend. And I agree with Alistair Heath. And then you go to The Guardian, which is on the other side of the spectrum to the Telegraph, supposedly more left-leaning, says Rishi Sunak says COVID economic emergency has only just begun. Chancellor says in spending review that UK will have to keep spending despite record peacetime borrowing. There you go. And there was another analysis from The Guardian that said jam today, because usually it's jam tomorrow. So there you go. The debt situation is not looking good. And that's what I wanted to touch upon as well. The national debt. We're told that the debt to GDP now is around 100%, that we've got 2 trillion national debt and 2 trillion in GDP. But that's not including public sector banks. And what does that mean? Well, during the 07-08 banking collapse in the UK, the government had to take on the debt from the banks that they nationalized, banks like Lloyd's and RBS or NatWest. If you look here, and this is from the government, this is from the Office of National Statistics. So there you go, net debt, including public sector banks. So if you include that debt that the government had to take to bail out the banks in 08, 09 or 07 to 09, the national debt right now is almost 2.5 trillion pounds. We're told it's still just 2 trillion. Well, because they try to hide that. They do say that it's excluding public sector banks. So the exact number to let you know is 2,401 billion or 2.4 trillion. That's the real national debt there. It's not 2 trillion. So if you take that, it's 120% of GDP, debt to GDP. So looking here at the Telegraph article, it talks about, of course, how the debt this tax year 20 to 2021 is going to be 394 billion. And I have to say, all these projections, now we're going to have projections for the next 5 years to 2025. They are always like underestimated, because I've spoken about this many times before. Back in 2010, George Osborne, who was the chancellor back then, said that we'd have balanced budget by 2015. What does a balanced budget mean? Well, it means that the deficit is going to disappear. And that's not the debt, that's the deficit. That's the difference between taxation and spending. If the government spends more than it taxes every year, it has a deficit, so it has to borrow. So here we are now in 2020, right? That's 5 years after Osborne said that the deficit was going to be like eliminated. And by the way, it wasn't eliminated. It was still here before the crisis of 2020. And now it's at 19% of GDP. So according to the chancellor, in the next tax year, which is 2022, that deficit is going to drop to 164 billion. You can calculate that as a deficit to GDP. If you take 2000, right, which is 2 trillion, they do expect GDP to grow by like 7% or 5% in the next tax year. I think they're a bit optimistic, but give them the benefit of the doubt. But my point here is that all these projections and forecasts are probably going to be underestimated. So I would say that by 2025, we could have a national debt of around 3 trillion. And that's including, of course, the 400 billion from the public sector banks. So things are not looking great. So how come our government and things are still going? Well, the big saving grace is interest rates. The fact that interest rates are really low. And how have we managed that? Well, usually someone that is near bankruptcy, has a lot of debt, has lost his or her job, would probably be offered very high interest rates if they wanted to borrow again. But in this case, we have what is called QE and the central bank printing money out of thin air. And that's what's kept interest rates low. But I'll read a section here of the Telegraph article, and this is what it says. Yes, incredibly, the total cost of servicing our debt will fall to a new historical low of 1.7% of government revenues next year. And yes, we have been able to borrow longer term than other countries, locking in this cheaper financing. But what happens if and when interest rates go up? So yeah, What does he mean by we've been able to borrow longer term? Well, the UK Treasury, one thing they've done that saved themselves is that they issued debt, longer term debt, instead of like the US Treasury is issuing a lot of short term bills. The UK has got a lot more longer term debt. The only problem with that, of course, is when interest rates start rising. Longer term interest rates rise a lot more usually than shorter term interest rates. So he says, we are, to paraphrase Bill Gross, writing at the time of the financial crisis, lying on a bed of nitroglycerine. In a crucial line, the OBR, which is the Office of Budget Responsibility. I think it should be called the OBI because it's been around for a few years and I don't think we have any responsibility. It's more the Office of Budget Irresponsibility, right? Explains that the impact of each 1 percentage point rise in short-term interest rates on the deficit has doubled from 6 billion or 0.2% of GDP to 12 billion or 0.5% of GDP. Rishi Sunak understands all of this and can surely barely sleep as a result. I don't think he's losing any sleep over this because it's not his money. It's really the public's money. What if a future banking or trade or military crisis sends interest rates up by 3%? The deficit would jump by 36 billion immediately. And what if rates shoot up even higher? So you might be asking, what are UK interest rates doing? Well, they're still very low, but they're moving up a little bit. I remember a few months ago looking at these yields on the gilts that it was negative up until like 7-year gilts, the maturity. You can see now that it's only up to 4 years that the yields are negative. So they're starting to move up. The longer term debt, of course, that's what the UK is more exposed to, the Treasury. I would say longer term is like 7 years, more. So those rates are starting to move up. And just to give you an example here, I'll show you the 7-year yield. As you can see, I talked about how a few months ago it was negative, while the 7-year yield was at minus 7 basis points, as you can see here in August, and now it's already at 12. 12 basis points is less than like 1%, of course, it's nothing in terms of interest, but it's the direction that we have to be worried about. So I would keep an eye on longer term yields. It would make things even more interesting if they start going up. And if interest rates really start spiking higher for the UK government, it will be like a snowball effect. It's gonna be more servicing of the debt. And then it's gonna be, how do you service the debt? Well, you issue even more debt. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. The other saving grace, of course, is the Bank of England. They're going to probably keep doing QE, even increasing QE to try to keep these interest rates low. The other escape valve, of course, is going to be the value of the currency. Not just versus fiat currencies, but versus real things, commodities, precious metals. We're not going to be able to buy as much things as we used to in the past with these Bank of England notes that are, of course, what the debt is denominated in. So there you go. That's the situation. And you can bet that what they spoke about yesterday, or the Chancellor specifically, is the rosy projections, and that's not even accounting for a no-deal Brexit. That would make things probably even worse as well. So now let's look at where the markets are this morning. It's 8:46 a.m. London time. So we've got spot gold at 1815.60. It's up just over $7. Range has been 1803 to 1819. Silver is at 23.40, up 6 cents. So silver underperforming a little bit here. Range has been 2350 to 2316. The Dow future is up 27 at 29,895. S&P future is up 4 points. NASDAQ 100 future is up 42, or 1/3%. The currencies, sterling is down 0.2% at 133.58. The euro is up slightly at 119.25. Dollar is down 0.2% versus the yen at 104.28. WTI crude is down 1.3% at 45.14. 10-year yield, U.S. Treasury 10-year yield is at 0.88. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Parler, and all these other platforms below here. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.